Welcome to the Edge Sports Week 2 betting preview. I'm your host, Ian O'Connor, Senior Data Analyst here at Edge Sports, and with me this week is my co-host, Frank Frigo, who is also co-founder of Edge Sports. Frank, how are you doing this morning? I know it's early for you out there on the West Coast.
Oh, this is great. Thanks for having me on the show today and excited to be part of it. A lot going on.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. But before we dive into some of this week's games, I wanted to remind everyone that we will have our show available for you every Thursday throughout the NFL season. We're going to preview the betting markets for Thursday Night Football as well as some value plays for Sunday's games. And also be sure to check out our all-new site and experience at EdjSports.com. That's EdjSports.com. And you can download our new app available for both iOS and Android, where you can get pregame betting insights for every NFL game for the whole season, as well as our fair value, as we'll discuss on the show, and the ability to track your bets to see the probability of them hitting in real time. So we want to start off by covering the methodology that goes into deriving our numbers for every game. So Frank, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so our approach is really the best of two worlds. So we use a very detailed customization method, which is how we configure the teams in the simulation. A lot of that relies on the DVOA work of Football Outsiders that goes into our Edge Power rankings. And those configurations go into the simulation, allows us to basically simulate from the opening kickoff and get an idea of the distribution of possible outcomes of spreads, totals, probability of winning. So it's a really sophisticated process, and it gives us a lot of insights about how the game may actually play out and how it compares to the perception of the sports betting public.
So it's a very comprehensive process, which is always good for sports bettors, especially when you're looking for some value there. Another important distinction to make is what we mean when we're talking about value versus just predicting what's going to happen. You're going to hear us say value a lot versus just saying, oh, we think this team's going to win, based on different prices in the market. So Frank, do you want to explain that for our audience as well, what we mean and what that distinction is?
Right. Well, that's really essential to the sports bettor, because even if you could predict outcomes perfectly, but if the market is also predicting outcomes perfectly, you don't really have any advantage. So the kind of things that we're looking for are the insights that the Football Outsiders DVOA and running it through the simulation model, the kind of insights those provide. And when we compare those to the market numbers, we're looking for some separation there in some cases where maybe there's things that we're picking up on that the general market isn't.
Yeah, so that's, like I said, a very important thing that we need to know when getting in here. Now, our first example for Thursday Night Football, there's really not a lot of value. We've got Washington hosting the New York Giants. Both teams sitting at 0-1. Washington's quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick is out due to injury. Got Taylor Heineke as a starter, and then the Giants, well, they've just got Daniel Jones as their starter. So what are we looking like on this one with the spread as far as our numbers versus that market? I said there's not a lot of value, but what is the model telling us on this one?
Yeah, so the market's got Washington as a 4-point favorite. Our edge fair value is Washington at -3, so that's really close. But we should note that certain numbers like a 3-point spread, a 7-point spread, it's very difficult to bump off of those numbers because because of the configuration of scoring in the NFL. Those are more common types of spreads that occur. But this we're valuing pretty close to the market price.
Yeah, but it looks like we've got the Giants at just 52.3% to cover that +4, a 55.3% chance to push or cover that +4. So like we said, not a lot there. The total, though, the market is at 43, which is our second lowest total, or the second lowest total of the week in the market, behind the New England Patriots at the New York Jets at 42. What does the edge model say on that one?
Yeah, so that's a pretty low total, of course, and we've actually got it valued a little bit lower than that at 41. So again, not too far off the market price, but something to pay attention to there.
Yep, and one thing to note, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen this week, but both Washington and New York's game totals were below 40. I think the Giants were right at 40, and Washington was at 36, I believe. So a couple teams that offenses aren't great. Washington's defense, as we know, is very good. New York's a little bit below average. So we're expecting this one to stay under. Let's move on to Buffalo and Miami. So there is some value in this one in the home Dolphins. Miami was 10th in DVOA last week, while Buffalo was only 24th overall. Buffalo did face Pittsburgh's projected number 1 defense, But Miami's another tough matchup. They finished 10th in defense last season in Football Outsiders DVOA, and they're projected to be above average again. So what are we looking at on this one? Like I said, there's a little bit of value, so why don't you tell everybody what we're looking at there?
Yeah, so we see a market price of Buffalo as a 2.5 point favorite, but we've actually got Miami, and the fair value is a slight favorite. So we've got Miami at about a 57% chance to cover at getting 2.5 points. And we've got Miami as a 53% chance to win outright compared to a market implied number of 45%. So again, a very tight matchup, but we're certainly leaning towards Miami on the value side of this.
Yeah, and we liked Miami last week against the spread, and they came up big with a turnover late against New England. They covered and they won outright, as we know. They've got the AFC East lead with the only team with one win after 1 week. So looking at the total, we've got a little bit of a difference from the market on this one as well.
Yeah, so the market price is around 48 for the total, and we've got a fair value of 43. So we're seeing that there's only about a 35% chance to exceed the 48 points. So yeah, it looks like there could be something there. I mean, again, it's still early in the season. I mean, you're coming out of week one, you've got some observations, a lot of different inputs into the model. This starts to really crystallize over time, but it seems to be that there's a bit of a discrepancy here between our numbers and the market prices.
Yeah, and like I said, Miami's defense is pretty good. They were really good last year. Buffalo, their defense came on very strong at the end of the season. They were projected to be in the top 10 in defense in Football Outsiders as well. So could be in for a low-scoring game there. This is something that Scott and I talked about a little bit last week. I want to get your insight on it. So in this game, 66% of the money is currently on Buffalo, but 52% of the bets are on Miami. What kind of insights do you take? Do you look at that a lot, and what kind of can you get from those numbers?
Well, you're always looking for kind of, trends in betting, but there's a distinction between the number of bets that are trending a certain way and what the sort of volume of money is doing, because it's really the volume of money that is setting the market price. But it's interesting to look at just maybe the market sentiment is what you see in those numbers, like the 66%.
Great. So now we'll move on to another division matchup here, Atlanta and Tampa Bay. So Atlanta looked absolutely terrible last week, played the Eagles. The Eagles just blew them out. There is some value here in the home Buccaneers. Last week we were a little bit lower on Tampa Bay. They were 9.5-point favorites against Dallas in that opening kickoff game. We had Dallas to cover that one. They did end up covering. This week we agree with the market and then some when it comes to Tampa Bay. What are we seeing on this one in the market and with our edge model there, Frank?
Yeah, so this is interesting. The market's got Tampa at -8. So, you've got to be a pretty strong favorite to get north of 7 points in the NFL. We rarely see numbers that get into the 2-touchdown range, but we've got Tampa as about 59% chance to push or cover the -8, and we think the fair value is -12 is the most likely kind of fair price of this, according to the simulation.
Yeah, and speaking of those large spreads, that's not even our biggest of the week. We've actually got Cleveland -14 against Houston. Pretty big spread. Cleveland looked good last week against Kansas City. Just a little spoiler there for you all. We're not going to cover it in this one, but we do have Houston with a pretty good chance to cover that, not necessarily to win. So now getting into the total of this Falcons-Buccaneers game, this one is pretty high. What are we seeing on this?
Yeah, so we're seeing a market price of 52 on the total. We've got the fair value as a little bit below that at 48, so we only see about a 37% chance to exceed the 52 points. But it's early in the season. You got Tom Brady, who's capable of putting up a lot of numbers, so we'll keep a close eye on this one.
Yeah, and I think that 48 is actually one of our highest of the week. And we've got Tampa Bay implied 30 points, so we think some points will be put up, but mostly by Tampa Bay. Like I said, Atlanta struggled to only 6 points last week against Philadelphia, who had Football Outsiders' 23rd projected defense. So they're going to have an even tougher matchup this week against that Tampa Bay defense that was projected as 4th overall. And like we talked about, pretty much everyone is on the Bucs on this one. 99% of the money and 81% of the bets are on Tampa Bay. So not a whole lot of dissent there in this game. So now let's move on to what looks to be the game of the week. Kansas City at Baltimore. You got Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. This is our second closest game of the week behind only Dallas and the Los Angeles Chargers. Frank, that looks like we've got some value here. It could be, people might disagree with us on this one, but what are we looking at on here?
Well, we think this is kind of a pick 'em. I mean, Kansas City's a small favorite at -2, but we think it's really looks to be a pretty close to a pick. If we think Baltimore, getting the +2 is about 56, 57% to push or cover. So this should be a good one.
Yeah, and we know both of those offenses can put up some points. The defenses, Baltimore is a little bit better than the Chiefs, but neither one of them has been really great, especially last week. They both gave up some points there. What are we looking at on the total?
Well, this is the highest market total of the week at 53. We don't quite get there in our simulation. We've got it at about 48. So that would put some value on the underplay.
Yeah, like I mentioned in the one before with Tampa Bay and Atlanta, 48 is our second highest. Only 2 games have a higher total in fair value totals. And that's Tennessee and Seattle, and Dallas and the Chargers, both at 50. So this one, like you said, not expecting this one to go under. Only about 36% chance to exceed that 53 points again in this one too. 96% of the money and 91% of the bets are on Kansas City. So a lot of people are thinking Kansas City. We think there's a little bit more value there in Baltimore. And so on the show last week, and one thing we highlighted was Pittsburgh against Buffalo as one of the undervalued teams to keep an eye on. Pittsburgh was priced about 8 to 10% lower in terms of win probability in the market than our numbers showed and ended up beating Buffalo. So this week, there's about a 13% difference in our money line versus the market in favor of Dallas against the Chargers. So unlike last week, we still had Pittsburgh below 50% to win compared to about 29% to the market. We like Dallas to just barely win this one straight up. So we've got Dallas at 51%. The market's only 38%. So we've got some value there. Like I said, Frank, we talked about, value doesn't necessarily mean what's going to win. Last week we said, Pittsburgh is only at 37% chance, but the market's 29. That's a good value pick here. It looks like we've got Dallas straight up as well as got some value there.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing we're looking for is, these kinds of discrepancies. Again, early in the season, we're going to learn a lot more about these teams as the season goes on, but this looks like one to keep an eye on.
Awesome. Well, Frank, thanks for joining me. That'll wrap up our Week 2 show. Again, be sure to check out all of our pregame betting insights for Week 2 on EdjSports.com. Again, that's EdjSports.com. And don't forget to download the Edge Sports app to get your betting preview for every matchup this season. Frank, thanks again for joining me this morning, and enjoy all the weekend action.
Thank you, Ian.